or a product of that system or that institution. So to say that we only recognize individual acts of racism is in itself ludicrous, because individual acts of racism are merely nothing but the product or the end result of the mindset that was created by an institution or a culture. It is your society, your cultural institution, your judicial system, your law enforcement, your school system, all of the institutions in your country are responsible for creating a mindset. The mindset that's going to develop on its own. The mindset is created by your governmental institution. So to say that there's no such thing as institutional racism is a fallacy, because individual acts of racism would not exist but for what people are being taught, the messages that are being sent. And when the judge in this case says that there is no evidence of racism, despite what Zimmerman said, she is protecting the product of racism. She is protecting the product that her institution produced. And she is also protecting the institution of racism in the law enforcement agency and the judicial system by now not allowing it to be talked about or considered in this case. I came across an article regarding institutional racism, what was pretty good. I want to share it with you at this time before we move on. It was originally posted at Resist Racism by Omowale, O-M-O-W-A-L-E, that's O-M-O-W-A-L-E. The last name is A-K-I-N-K-U-N-D-E. Multicultural Education, Volume 7, Number 2, Winter 1999. You can go to my Facebook page and go into Join Reception in America and read that entire article. It's a very good article. It's entitled America's Recognition of an Individual Act versus an Institutionalized System of Racial Oppression. One step forward, one step backwards. Efforts to disarm institutional racism are labeled acts of racism. Institutionalized protection of racism. That's a long title, but yes, it's a very good article. I would suggest that everybody go and read it. Yes, as he was saying, when somebody talks about racism, the very fact that they're exposing racism is used as evidence that they're racist, and that type of attitude and belief protects institutional racism. How can you confront and challenge institutional racism when your efforts to challenge and confront institutional racism is seen and classified as racist in and of itself? The way that racism in America is conceived of today as an individual act, all a white person has to do is not say certain words and they'll be okay. All you got to do is take off your Ku Klux Klan outfit and you can beat up somebody just as long as you don't wear your Ku Klux Klan outfit and don't call them a nigger while you're beating them up. Don't call them a nigger or speak or make any reference to race as you're committing this crime, and then race will not be an issue. That's the way racism is defined and treated today as an individual act. Individual racism suggests that racism as a construct does not exist. but for being manifested by the acts of an individual person. Under that construct, racism cannot be, does not exist on an institutional basis. Isn't that silly? Isn't that absolutely absurd to say that racism in America does not exist unless it's committed by an individual person? To say that racism in America does not exist unless it is manifested in the behavior of an individual is absolutely absurd. If you believe that, then you have to ignore the existence of slavery. You have to ignore the establishment of racism in America when it first came over here. Racism was introduced to America, or to North America, as an institution called America, manifested in the form of slavery. That's how racism existed for more than 400 years in America and continues to exist today. We had slavery, then we had Jim Crow laws, that's legislation. We had separate, supposedly but equal, that was enforced by the United States Supreme Court. Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate but equal, it was legal. It was legal to force black people to live in certain neighborhoods, apartheid South Africa. It was legal to have separate school systems, for black people not to be employed in white jobs. It was legal. That's systematic. That's systematic. That's institutional racism. The legalization of discrimination, the legalization of separation is institutional. It's not an individual act. So to say that racism does not exist unless it exists in the form of an individual act manifested by an individual is nothing but a ludicrous and false assertion. Such assertion only protects the institution of racism, because racism, in fact, is nothing but an institutional manifestation that produces mindsets that cause individuals to act in racist manners. Let me read another part of this article. It's interesting. It says that such a notion, that is the concept of racism in America only being recognized as an individual act manifested by a person, is exactly how racism is mostly perceived in American society, and that the possibility of deconstructing white supremacy, the progenitor and true underlying problem of racism and racist ideology, does not become the focus of racial investigation. That's right. When you say that racism is only an individual act manifested by an individual and not the institution, the focus is on the individual and not the creator or the source or the problem of racism. Racism is an institutional problem. It's not an individual problem. But when you only focus on racism as existing as an individual construct, you don't focus on the real problem. You're just focusing on the consequences or the symptoms. You're not going to the disease itself. The disease is the institution. When you focus on individuals as being racist and not institutions as being the progenitors or creators of racism, then you protect an institutionalized system of racism. The focus should not be on individuals, but on the institution itself. And as we can see, this is bared out in the case in Sanford, Florida, with George Zimmerman, because it was the institution that decided that there was no probable cause in this case. It was an institution that exercised racism. Well, let's get back to the commentary on this George Zimmerman trial. You want to call it a trial? I call it mischaracter of justice, a deduction of justice, because the defense and the prosecution are on the same side, and I'll show you how they are playing you, America, and later on. It must be remembered that the law enforcement agency and the judicial system in Sanford, apartheid Sanford, Florida, are both racist institutions. Yes, I said that before, and I say it again. Remember? It was the police department that refused to arrest Zimmerman after Zimmerman shot this boy at night and made the statement that he made on the 911 tape. So the police reviewed the 911 tapes and saw that there was obviously those people in George Zimmerman's mind, and he had some type of willful hatred towards those people. But so did the police department. That's why they didn't arrest him. It was the police department that did not arrest George Zimmerman. It was the police department that said there was no probable cause. There is no reason to arrest this man. There's no legal basis to arrest this man. So we're not going to arrest him. He killed this boy. We heard what he said. We're not going to arrest him and let the judicial system determine whether or not he's guilty or not guilty. Because we're going to make a decision that this white man should not be arrested. When this incident first happened, the police department said, there's no probable cause. There's no probable cause. We're not going to arrest him. There's no probable cause. However, now, as you see, we are in trial. There is probable cause. There was probable cause. However, before the television station came down there and made this thing public, police department and the judicial system said there was no probable cause. However, when the television station came down there and Al Sharpton and all those fools went down there and started raising hell and exposed this incident to the public, the American public, all of a sudden, now probable cause exists. Didn't it exist before? Yeah, it existed before. Probable cause existed before the television station went down there, when they decided not to indict. But that was the manifestation of institutional racism. There was no probable cause before the television went down there and made this thing public because of institutional racism. The institutional racism I'm talking about, I mentioned earlier, is manifested by the fact that this police department and this judicial system decided not to arrest George Zimmerman and decided not to prosecute him based on a self-defense argument. However, when this thing became public, all of a sudden, probable cause suddenly magically appeared and he was arrested. Why wasn't he arrested before? Because of institutional racism, like I mentioned before. That's all. It's clear. The police didn't arrest Zimmerman because they wanted to. They arrested him but only because they were forced to arrest him. here we have in